Hey everyone, welcome to our small footprint. Today I have a video sharing with you Skinnymixers Butter Chicken, which is basically what the main thing that I got done today, other than vacuum sealing the rest of the cooked chicken as well. We've had a lot of admin type stuff to get done the last few days and a few construction bits and pieces, nothing worth sharing, but stuff that still needed to be done. So we haven't spent as much time in the kitchen, but we had to get this done and I wanted to share it because it sounds like a really complicated recipe, but it's well worth the time. So I wanted to share it with you so you could give it a go. So Sonnet, Kavik and I made this in the kitchen today and I have shared it for you, and we did some garlic and cheese naans as well. So enjoy, and I will see you again tomorrow. Thanks guys. Today we decided to make butter chicken. So this recipe is a Skinnymixers recipe. It's made for the Thermomix. I'm not cooking in my Thermomix at the moment. We're still sorting out the solar for that purpose, but I do use my Thermomix in a lot of the process of it. So part of the chicken that I had pieced and marinated and everything the other night, I marinated in the ingredients for the butter chicken. So I'll put a link in the comments to the recipe. It's free on the Skinnymixers website. So to start off, you marinate your chicken, which I did, and then I cooked it because I was cooking all the other chicken, so I cooked it off a little bit. I don't think you have to, you can cook it in the sauce, but it's nice to have that little bit of added flavor anyway. And then we make the tomato paste mixture. So in the Thermomix I put some ginger, some garlic, a couple of cans of diced tomatoes, and a couple of containers of tomato paste. I didn't think about it. I should have used a couple of my jars of roasted tomatoes because it's all been pureed anyway, but I didn't think about it. So I used store-bought canned stuff. Once that's all blended, you put it in a bowl and put it aside for later, and then you move on to the onions. So I think it was 200 grams of onion for the recipe, and I doubled it, so I did those, and Sonnet was helping me again today, so she minced them in the Thermomix. So they just go in the Thermomix, speed 5 for 5 seconds, scrape it down, and then speed 5 for 5 seconds again, and it all gets done. And Sonnet pulled them off for me and put them in the pan with some ghee. So the recipe calls for butter. We don't use butter, but ghee, similar premise. So we put all the onions and the ghee in a pan ready to be cooked off, and then we stick it on the stove, and you sweat off the onions, stirring it really regularly. So Sonnet was helping me. I think Kavik helped me for a bit this too. And you just want to stir them, especially for us, we're on gas burners and they're quite large gas burners, so you have to watch it because this is an American product too. The gas burners that we use, it doesn't have the safety valve that means that the flames go out if the gas goes out if the flame goes out. So having it on low can be problematic. So you have to stand there and watch it to make sure it's doing it. So the kids were stirring and I was there as well. Once you've sweat off the onion mix, you then have to add your first lot of spices to cook those through as well. So the first lot is, I'll put the recipe down, but it's cinnamon sticks and some cumin, some cloves, some star anise. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head, but I will put the link in the comments anyway. And you add that to the onions and cook that off for a little while. After that, you add your tomato mix that you had put aside. So you mix that through the sweated onions and get that up to a simmer as well. And the kids again took turns mixing that through for me and keeping an eye on it and making sure it was moving and not sticking to the bottom, which was cute. You add the garam masala and the salt at that point, I believe, which is what I'm doing here, and then you keep on mixing it, and then you add the chicken as well, and again keep on mixing it until it's cooked through. So I let this go for probably 15-20 minutes to make sure that those thighs are well cooked through and absorbing the sauce, and the sauce is thickening up a little bit. After you do all that, you then add your thickening agents. So the recipe states that if you don't want to thicken it, if you're used to like a wet sauce here, then you can, and if you don't like it sweet, then don't, and all that sort of thing. I follow the recipe for these. We really enjoy it this way. The kids really enjoy it this way too. So you add a bunch of ground almonds or cashews to the mix, as well as some honey or sugar or maple syrup or whatever you want to use. So I used some of the dark local honey that we got and almond meal for this one because that's just happened to be what I had, and then mixed that up as well. And then we just let that simmer, making sure to check it regularly for 10 minutes to get it all sort of blended. And then after that I stuck a lid on it and put it aside because I'll heat it back up before we eat it for dinner. It's always nice to have it reheated. Curries just always taste good when they're reheated. Then once we got all that sorted and done, I had to vacuum seal up the rest of the chicken. So I cooked all that chicken and then I stick it in vacuum seal bags in the freezer for us to eat throughout the rest of the month. I tend to vacuum seal it in 600 gram or 300 gram lots so that I can pull them out according to what I'm cooking or how we're eating them, and that seems to work well, those proportions for us. I may have to bump them up as the kids get a bit older, but at the moment that works. So like, the 600 gram for them if they're having flatbreads and salads and chicken and things like that, but 300 grams is enough to mix through a dish that has a whole lot of vegetables and pasta and things like that. So we may have to bump that up at some point, but we do try and not rely on meat as our only protein source as much as possible. For the butter chicken, I made some naans. Now I hadn't got around to doing my sourdough one, so I just did a yeasted naan dough. It's very basic. I will put the ratios down in the bottom. It's just a slightly higher hydration with a decent amount of olive oil and stuff in it as my flatbreads, and I mixed it all up: yeast, salt, sugar, olive oil in the KitchenAid, and got it all to bring together to a ball, and then it just gets put aside to rise. I used warm water from the kettle because it's quite cold out and I had left it fairly late, so it only really takes, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes to get to a nice sort of a bouncy dough that is usable for this sort of thing. Because you're going to deflate it to roll it out anyway, it's not that big a deal about how proofed it is. So I put that aside for later. While that was being sorted, I started my rice. So my rule of thumb for rice is that I give the rice a quick rinse, and then I put it in the pot, and then I add water until the water comes between my first and second knuckle height above the rice. I've got fairly short fingers, so I found the first knuckle wasn't quite enough, but between my first and second knuckle works. Stick it straight on the stove, bring it up to a boil, turn it down to a simmer for 10 minutes until you can see all the little air pockets in the top of the rice. Turn it off, let it sit for 15 minutes before fluffing it. It seems to work perfectly well for me every time doing it this way. I'm really glad I found what works for me, because rice can be just such a hassle. Once the dough had risen, you can see that it's a really nice, bouncy, unsticky, easy to work with dough, and that's really important for things like naan, because you want to roll them out fairly evenly for cooking, because you want to be able to tear them off to pick your food up with. So this is a really nice feel dough, this one. I do what I always do. If you haven't seen these videos before, I weigh out my dough balls. I do them slightly bigger in the naan dough, probably about the 75 gram mark, because they're used as a side to tear up and lift things up, and I leave them slightly thicker than like if I was making a flatbread dough. I always shape my chunks into balls to rest for a little while before I roll them out, which helps to keep the shape that you want to roll them out in. It allows you to roll them out with a smoother edge rather than sort of a jagged edge. I added cheese to a couple for myself just because I can. So all I do is I open up that ball, make sure that you're thinning the edges as you open it up into a ball, because they're all going to double up on each other. So you want to leave the center a bit thicker, thinning out the edges, add a handful of cheese, and then you pinch all those edges back in and roll it back into a ball. When you're adding cheese, you want to make sure that you leave it for a while once you put the cheese in there before you try rolling it out. Otherwise the cheese will push through the dough, so you want that cheese to warm up a little bit and the dough to relax a little bit before rolling out. So when I roll them out, all I do is I roll them into sort of an elongated oval shape. This way I can fit 2 in my cast iron square pan as well. I leave them a little bit thicker, so they're rolled out to basically the same shape or size as my flatbreads, except that there's about 25-30 grams more dough per naan. So they're just that little bit thicker, which is preferable for the naan, for this sort of a thing, for picking up food with and that sort of thing. So I just put them into the elongated rectangles, and then I cook them off in the pan, and they just take a couple of minutes each side. Just like any of my other flatbread type doughs, they puff up nicely, they cook through and have those little charred spots when it's done in the cast iron, and we really enjoy them like that. This is how they look when they come off the pan. Those little charred bits add to the flavour of them, and we enjoy them cooked this way. Once the naans were cooked, what I had done was I had heated up some of my smoked garlic paste that I made in some ghee on the stove, and then what I did was used a pastry brush, and as the naans came off, I just brushed over a bit of that smoked garlic ghee over the top of them, which is really tasty. And then I salted ours a little bit too, I think, it just elevated the flavour a whole lot. It was really nice. I thought I'd put a clip in of rolling out the cheese one. So this is rested. This is the last ones I did, the very last ones I rolled out. So when it's been rested and it's done this way, you can just roll it out like any of the others. The cheese stays within the layers of the dough, which means it's not going to burn to your pan. It's not going to, spread cheese anywhere, and it cooks up and melts all that cheese in the middle, which is really nice. And then this is how we served it. So these are my cheese ones with the last of the smoked garlic ghee over the top, and then our bowls with some rice and some butter chicken sauce. So I hope you enjoyed this video and gives you an inclination to try this recipe. It's really good. It's definitely worth the effort. We've tried a lot of butter chicken recipes over the time, and we definitely do appreciate this one, even with the amount of work that's required. So give it a go and try it out, and I will see you again tomorrow. Thanks, guys.